Can you use a jazz radio host voice while you present? No, you kind of already do.
Okay, good. Because I was going to say I can just use my normal presenting voice because that's
No,
the only one I have.
100%.
Yeah.
I think it fits perfectly.
All
All
right.
right. Got some people joining. Start to get serious. Give us just a couple more minutes. Get people a chance to log in. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us in our third series, or our third episode in the series, A Marketing Director's Guide to Prepping for a Website Redesign. I'm starting off fantastic here. In this episode, we're going to be talking about technology. We've brought in our resident expert in technology, our director of technology, Peter Ajtai, who's going to be talking about why it's important and what is a good technology for a marketing team. All right, Peter, you're up.
All right. Hi, I'm Peter Ajtai, the Director of Technology at Solid Digital. We partner with a lot of marketing teams, and I wanted to share some of the things we noticed. For some marketing teams, technology can feel like it's out of their purview. You might feel, so you might be here today because you find technology choices overwhelming. Maybe your competition is becoming more tech savvy than you are, and you just want to catch up. At any rate, you will always have to deal with technology, sometimes because you want to, and sometimes because IT just isn't helping you as much as you wish they would, which is something we've heard from several of our clients. So today, I want to discuss how technology can affect you, how complexity affects technology and you, and a strategy for how to approach technological choices. So to provide some context, I'm going to start with a brief history of the web. Then we'll discuss how the management of technological complexity can lead to a spectrum of outcomes, from vendor lock-in to a lack of flexibility. Finally, we'll wrap up by going over a strategy to use when picking your technologies. So the web overall is a technology-rich space. The number of technologies has increased over time, but the way we interact with these technologies has also been changing over time. The first web page, as we know it, was created way back in 1991. It was basically nothing but text and hyperlinks. By 1994, there were internet ads. Then came even more interactivity with JavaScript and Flash. Complexity was added quickly as functionality and styling was added to web pages. Very early on, the CMS was born. A CMS is a content management system. I'm going to focus on CMS technology quite a bit in this webinar, just because the CMS is arguably the core of your website. One of the first CMSs was started in 1995. It was called Vignette. Jesse, I believe you used Vignette, is that right?
I did. Like the first agency I worked at, it was a big deal that we had Vignette, and it was really awful. I remember I used it to build a Jenny Craig site, but we used it for everything at the time, and I just remember asking myself, like, why are we actually using this instead of just a database connection? But I got the point of what the purpose was.
Nice. So in the early days, you often did have to be familiar with all the technology you use, like the database, how to make the database connection, all of those things. Today's sites are more complex than the original sites, but all of the complexity and technology is often hidden from you. but it's still there and can affect you in surprising ways. So Vignette was one CMS. Another CMS, WordPress, was created in 2003. And WordPress is a nice balance between being complex enough to be flexible, it yet has a code base that is pretty understandable, and it's popular enough to be easy to find devs to work on it. And full disclosure, we use it pretty often. Picking a CMS is a very important decision, and you might feel like you're stuck with the choice that you currently have. While it does take real work to switch from one CMS to another, this webinar series is about redesigning your website, and during a redesign is the most ideal time to swap from one CMS to another. So don't feel like you're stuck with the CMS that you currently have. And in 2007, the iPhone was released and mobile browsing began. This led to responsive design. And responsive design is making sure that your site looks good on desktop, mobile, and all the screen sizes in between. And things have stayed pretty much the same since 2007. Just kidding. There's so much change. It's hard to capture it with individual dates. There are really more and more options that become available every year, and more technologies that enter the scene. So the growth of complexity is unlikely to stop. So let's just take one specific example, the CMS market. So currently, there are more than 500 CMSs to choose from. And many of these CMSs are free. The market is often built around plugins or services that are included with these plugins, or maybe the implementation of setting the CMS up or the plugins up. The CMS market was globally valued at $36 billion in 2018. By 2026, it's projected to be almost $124 billion. So 3 times the 2018 value. So as you can see, the choices you have to pick from and just the amount of technology available is expanding. And to go visually show you how that has changed historically over time, let's take a look at how websites looked in the past and what they look like now. So this is the first web page. It was created August 6, 1991 by Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web. It's basically just text and hyperlink. It's just very basic HTML, not much there. Here we have that Apple website in 1998, just a few years later. Things are starting to look busier. You can easily see that there's extra styling and functionality that was added on. This site is backed by a database. It's got videos you can look at. It has forms to fill out if you want to register to win something, apparently. So more technology was layered on. Finally, here's an example of a modern website. It's a website we did for Gerber Plumbing. Today's sites can look simpler than older sites. Sites today have large images and ample empty space, but this hides a lot of complexity. For example, this website integrates with a separate product database. It uses a digital asset management system and has automatic content translation, among other things. As you can see, some of the technologies used on the site are listed on the left. So today's websites deeply integrate into various business applications like CRMs and ERPs. Each of these technologies can affect your site in various ways. Ideally, they add needed functionality. Additionally, they can often affect the 3 S's of stability, scalability, and security. Complexity generally makes things less secure, since it's easier to make a mistake and there's a larger area in which to make this mistake. And just so you know, I'll touch on security in a few slides. So this complexity and the many ways technologies can affect your website and company makes it really important to manage technology well. it can be tempting to hand off the responsibility of building and maintaining your website and its associated technologies to someone else, just because the choices seem so overwhelming. But we think there is a way to maintain your website as your own and even manage the various technologies via either an agency, freelancers, or an internal IT team. But it's important to make the correct choices when setting things up initially. And I'll discuss how to do that here. And again, even if you didn't set things up ideally initially, a website redesign is an ideal place to revisit how things are set up and change them as the site gets redesigned. So just because things are set up a certain way and your site is working a certain way doesn't mean you're stuck. So as technology advances in complexity and scope, fear becomes more primitive. This is a quote that illustrates how scary it can be to think about complexity and technology and how it can affect your business. But somehow, whether or not you want to, you do have to manage how you work with all this technology. So I'm going to describe the spectrum of outcomes that can be triggered when you select different technologies. There are basically three situations I want to discuss. They depend on the flexibility and popularity of the technologies you pick. The reason a marketing team should care about technology is that it can either help you implement the solutions you require, prevent you from being as flexible as needed, or completely take control out of your hands via vendor lock-in. And that's what those three scenarios are what are illustrated in this diagram. First, if the platform you choose is too simple, it won't be flexible enough. So you won't be able to, the platform won't be able to grow with you as your needs change. Second, if the platform is flexible, but not popular enough, it'll be hard to manage due to its complexity. And it'll be hard to find help if it's not popular enough. And finally, there's a sweet spot you can find where the platform you pick is flexible enough to do everything you need and popular enough to easily create the website and then maintain it into the future. It can be tempting to manage complexity by just trying to get rid of it. Many SaaS website builders are like this. So examples are Wix and to a lesser degree Shopify. The problem is that these sites are really easy to set up. They're quick to get going, but then they're hard to customize and grow with. They're too rigid in what they do. So for example, we did a Shopify site once, and there was only a little bit of customization to it that had to be done. But this little bit of customization, a custom plugin, required setting up an entire separate server simply to serve that custom plugin. So it was just very difficult to work with, and it was not flexible enough to do everything we wanted it to. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, from a setup that is too simplistic and allows no choice, is one that is too complex or too flexible. For example, some agencies will custom build a CMS to your exact specifications. And this can sound good initially because basically you're getting everything you want, but who else can maintain a CMS like this beside the people who built it? So you want to make sure that everyone, not just the agency that set things up, can maintain your website. For example, we had a client who came to us because they were stuck with an expression engine implementation. And the expression engine is, like, people know about it, but it's definitely not the most supported CMS. And they didn't have the login, the admin login to the CMS, and the vendor that had set it up had gone out of business. So I mean, that's, talk about vendor lock-in. The vendor's not even there anymore, and you're stuck, unable to control your website.
That's like worse than vendor lock-in.
Yeah, that's yeah, it's just lock-in. There's no vendor there anymore.
Right.
So whether you like it or not, the specific technologies you pick or help pick will determine where on the spectrum of too rigid to too flexible you fall. And the popularity of your technology will determine how easy it is to maintain. You generally want to build on platforms that are fairly popular and not overly rigid. Some of the individual technologies you pick might veer from this pattern, but consider each carefully since you are building a house you will have to live in for potentially quite a while. Like most things technology, the platform and associated technologies you pick is a multifaceted choice. That is, the technologies you pick impact many things, from, as we just discussed, how easy it is to create and maintain your site, to the security of your site and potentially business as an entirety. Since sites are more and more integrated into various aspects of your business, security is really important. There are many things that affect security. Here are some of the items that can affect security the most. So first of all, the platform and extensions you pick and how often you update them can have a huge impact on security. We often use WordPress. It's got a big code base, but one way this complexity and security risk is handled is by having so many people use WordPress because it's popular. So a lot of people use it, test it, work with it, and it's open source, so everyone can see the code. And there's a lot of patches that get released, keeping WordPress secure. Additionally, WordPress is a mature platform. Security vulnerabilities tend to peak during the growth phase of the platforms. For a popular and mature platform, vulnerabilities get fixed quickly and reliably. So there are a lot of hacks on WordPress sites, but the majority of hack sites are just out of date. We sometimes get calls from old clients asking us to fix a hacked site. Invariably, their plugins and WordPress core are out of date. If you keep your site up to date, it's probably your users or their weak passwords that will enable hackers to attack your site. So passwords are an example where technology can affect you even if you try to ignore it. It's the available technology that determines how easy it is to hack a specific password. If your passwords are too simple, people can more easily overtake your site. Finally, your host can either greatly improve or worsen your security. Most, but not all, commercial hosting providers are pretty good. So for example, we often use WordPress engine, and they definitely prioritize security. All these considerations can feel overwhelming, but really these are opportunities for you to control the website you own. If you find the right partner and pay attention to the high level of the technology decisions about your website, you're going to be in a good spot. And shameless plug, if you want to hear more about finding the right partner, watch the first webinar in this series. And I've been talking about technologies, so it might be natural to assume that the way to approach building a website is to pick your desired platform and associated technologies and just go from there. But actually, you'll end up in a much better spot if you first choose where you want to go. That is, you pick your desired outcome first, and then let that guide you to the appropriate technologies. So some examples of how you might do this can be thought about by thinking about the examples of desired outcomes. So these are things like an easy to manage CMS would be an example, or maybe having a low cost of maintenance. Finding the right technology to create your outcome can be tricky and often comes down to experience. For example, many of our clients want some control over their websites in terms of publishing content and making minor tweaks to styling, while we as an agency want the ability to design and implement pages and themes for them easily. And it's taken us quite some time to get here, but we found a good solution for now. Initially, we had our own custom CMS, but that was difficult to develop while helping clients at the same time. Then we had a workflow where we created, with Photoshop, we created PSDs and had programmers implement them in WordPress, basically hand coding it. And this was just very time consuming and really costly for the client. Finally, now we found a page builder in WordPress that works for us really well. And it's a really nice workflow for both us and our clients, but it's taken us a long time to get here. So as you can see, the team you pick to work with can affect the technologies that they suggest to you. And the team's experience will color their choices on technologies. So there are several other things that can affect technology. There are many small configuration changes in various technologies that can affect your branding. Not all companies with tech teams understand branding, nor how carefully, like how to configure widgets and things to conform to your existing branding. And sometimes your site can fall behind relative to where you are with branding. How easy it is to update your site to make it up to date to your branding is a very important consideration when picking technologies. And for a lot of sites we bid on, we find out there's a redesign that is almost complete, mostly paid for, but never deployed. One of the most impactful things that will affect the technology you can use is the implementation team's ability to deliver. Your technology choices don't matter if it never goes live. And the scope and complexity of websites these days means that you will have to keep working with the team you pick over a long period of time. So ideally, you should pick an agency that you enjoy working with. And finally, how much ownership you want over your website should determine the technologies you're comfortable integrating into your website. If you're going to completely outsource the creation, maintenance, and content management versus if you're going to maintain closer control over them, will help you consider what technologies you find acceptable. Most of our clients desire a high level of ownership, and they want to be able to control what happens with their own websites. And this seems pretty reasonable to us. So that's the way we look at things too. So to wrap up, websites are complicated. Their technology can affect your business in many ways. So it's important to be aware of your technology decisions and how they impact the flexibility of your site and how they impact your relationship with your vendors. Overall, you should try to pick technologies that are actively supported and focus on security. And that's it. So I wanted to see if there were any questions. Let's see.
We did have one question about Salesforce CMS. Are you familiar with Salesforce CMS?
Yeah.
And have you done any integration with WordPress? How difficult is that?
We've done some integrations with various aspects of Salesforce. So one of the ways we interact with Salesforce most commonly is not Salesforce directly, but Pardot through forms. But we often we've done integrations in the past pushing user data back to Salesforce via an API.
If somebody approached you that they had worked with an agency or they were working with an agency on building out their website, and it was a custom CMS, like what recommendations would you give them about evaluating whether or not to work with a custom CMS, or is there some way of like deferring that and saying no, I want to work with
Um,
WordPress or whatever?
I think I definitely ask questions about how to questions that help illuminate how easy it would be to maintain the website into the future. And like, so the questions I would ask are like asking for documentation about the website. Something that would be very helpful is if they have other clients that have used this custom CMS, if they can put you in touch with them, that would be really good. And then also ask them questions about, well, no one likes to talk about it, but eventually you and that vendor may part ways. So a really good question is what to do then. So ask them if they know other agencies that support this platform, and just try to dig into using questions what would happen in the future, a couple of years down the road. And that's kind of the same approach I would also use even with, integrating with Salesforce CMS, like with integrations. It's just um, like you can set up almost anything initially, but think about how easy it will be to maintain in the future and who will do that. For example, when API updates come out, who will update your integrations and things like that. So always ask questions looking toward the future. And like just in general for marketing websites, I mean, like I said, we use WordPress quite a bit. And so I'd have a hard time kind of
Yeah.
picking any other technologies out of the box, like any other go-to technologies. So just even asking them specifically about WordPress and like why their solution is better or easier to maintain specifically
Yeah.
than WordPress is a good way
I know
to
I know
give
there's
questions.
some bigger web design, web development companies around here
Mhm.
in Chicago that use their own CMS and they kind of mandate it for their clients. And I've just heard that it's really, you know, it's really tough to get them to make changes for them if they need it, and that it's not well supported. And but it's really hard then to migrate off of it.
Yeah,
And it's a way, it's a tactic that a lot of I wouldn't call them agencies. I would say like they're web production houses will use to get you in the door. The cost will be low, but then once you're in, the maintenance and the
yeah,
ongoing support's going to be higher, and they got you at that point. Somebody else asked about .NET Nuke. I don't know if
yeah.
you have experience with .NET Nuke. I do.
We actually do. We migrated a site away from .NET Nuke just because it's just not as popular as it used to be, and there's yeah, we found it a little too restrictive. But because it's a database-backed CMS, the migration wasn't too bad. So we had a client who had a .NET Nuke website with I think a couple of maybe around 100 posts or so, and we were able to just loop through the posts and pull them over to WordPress. And then they found that WordPress was the individual pages were just easier to maintain. And yeah, so I
Yeah.
mean, not much experience, but we did do a migration.
My experience, and this gets into a little bit more of the technologies behind content management systems, but .NET was a very, very popular web technology in the early 2000s. It was and still is like my favorite framework, and C# is my favorite language to develop in. So I am very partial to the technology. However, I think with PHP and JavaScript just kind of like being used so much in web technologies now, it's I won't say it's not used. .NET, it's still used a lot in enterprise, but I think if you are a smaller, mid-sized organization that wants a technology that's going to be widely supported, and there's a million plugins that are up to date and constantly improved, .NET Nuke, I think, kind of has gone the way of the dodo bird a little bit. But I still think, like, you know, the back end is pretty solid, pun intended. And you know, it's a if you are integrating a lot of Microsoft services, then I would take a look at .NET Nuke as a potential option. But there's going to still be a lot of custom work around that platform that you wouldn't be able to find the kind of like page builder work or plugins that you're talking about here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's definitely one of the most important things. I guess there's two things when you consider a platform. One is just the platform itself. You want to make sure it's easy to use. You want to make sure, find some vendors who can support it, find definitely more than one vendor. But then arguably even more important than the platform itself is the plugin or extension ecosystem. Because whenever you're creating a website, what is really expensive is custom dev. So these days, like, you can often find a lot of plugins that are high quality, secure, and have been written by other people, and other people maintain it. So that's having a big plugin ecosystem generally makes the features you want to implement quicker to implement, and also the platform just easier to work with, because the things you want to do are easy to accomplish.
Awesome. Thanks,
right.
Peter. Much
Yeah.
appreciated. We do have another session webinar coming up next month. Do you have the details on the next screen, Peter? Or
No.
oh, well,
I have references on the next screen. Sorry.
okay, so we'll be posting. We'll send it out. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us, and thanks for asking questions. And Peter, great job. We'll see you next month sometime.
All right. Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, everyone.